So I want to talk about the one thing that you're not supposed to talk about these days, which is Wuhan and China's role in the whole creation of the coronavirus. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. I am Trish, and I'm a little bit annoyed right now because it seems that a social media company, kind of a big one, big deal, LinkedIn, where I have about 400,000 followers, LinkedIn decided it took offense to a recent post that I put up, which actually, if you think about it, was career related because let's not forget, because I happened to say something that a lot of people disagreed with, which, by the way, I was right on, and that was the politicization of coronavirus. It affected my career. Therefore, I should have the right to post something like this on a career site, right? Anyway, I put a lot of news articles up there, and one of the articles I put just recently was Lord Conrad Black's piece on, in the New York Sun, by the way, on how politicized coronavirus had become and how we need to hold China responsible for what happened, regardless of politics, right? An important point of view. He also cited, by the way, that it was yours truly that happened to notice, before any other reporter in the universe, it seems, that this was being politicized. And he cited me for that and commended me for that. And I posted the piece. It's the first little infraction I've gotten from LinkedIn, but sure enough, they took issue with it. They took issue. Now, why would that be? Why would that be? Think about it for a second. I mean, he's commending the fact that I saw the politicization of the virus long before anyone else. But apparently, again, you're not allowed to go there. You're just not allowed to go there. But I'm going to go there, okay? Because that's what I do over and over again. Anyway, we had the G7 wrapping up, of course, and we've got lots of big news coming out of that. They've got an anti-coal, anti-car, green energy agenda, which, by the way, as an investor, I would say don't ignore, right? Do not ignore that, because let's leave politics for aside for a moment and forget about whether you agree with it or not. This is sort of the way of the world these days. You got BlackRock backing them, the largest asset manager, if you would, in the entire world. And so this is something that is very much going to be a priority. I know Obama tried it and was not successful, but you now have all of the cool kids, right, and Joe Biden saying that this is what we want to do. Now, they're facing a threat vis-a-vis China, because China doesn't really care. China's saying, well, wait a second, you guys got to live by a certain set of rules for hundreds and hundreds of years. Shouldn't we get to live by the same set of rules as well? And so they're saying we don't need to necessarily play by that green agenda environment. Well, that's not fair, right? I mean, it's part of what the previous administration kept pointing out. It's the reason why we didn't join the Paris Accord, because that's not fair. It's not right that China can get to, blow a hole through the ozone layer. Not that we want to do that, by the way, but you got to hold them accountable. And we haven't been, really, when you think about it. I want to cite something. There is a chemical called CFC11. It's actually used for the insulation of buildings and for homes. And it was sort of like outlawed, right? Years ago, back in 2010, the whole world said we're going to stop using this, including China. But did China actually stop using it? Of course not. Of course not. China continued to do so. And so in northeastern China, what do you know? You look up and there's a hole through the ozone layer there, because they did not hold up their end of the bargain. And so when you think about signing on to these big climate platforms, you need to think about that. That said, one of the things I like, and we're going to get back to Wuhan in a second, because Mike Pompeo is coming out railing against China right now, saying that they had a hand for sure in all of this. But let me go back to this anti-coal, anti-car, green energy agenda. They want to do this, and they need to take some responsibility, if you would, for the future of the world, right? And I get that, and this is why they're all signing on to this. But simultaneously, you also have to think about the future of your own population. So you got to balance this all out. One of the things that they've talked about in the Biden administration, and the White House is now talking about, is how he's got this big plan, basically, to create green energy everywhere. I'll believe it when I see it. I do think he has a better shot than Obama. But again, you got to keep everything in perspective. This right now is the biggest threat to the world. It's not World War III with China. It's somehow climate change. But I'll tell you, it's all sort of the same thing, because China doesn't care. And China's out there doing deals with lots of African nations, Venezuela is a great example. What they say is, hey, we'll offer you all this money. You want to build up your infrastructure. You want to do this. You want to do that. Here's the money. Here's a blank check. They have what you would call predatory or shark loan practices that are put into play. And so they charge a ton of interest in this and that. And when the country can't pay, as often they can't in some of these emerging marketplaces, China swoops in and says, okay, well, you owe us that port, or you owe us that mine, or you owe us these commodities. And so this is how China is enriching itself and colonizing in some way, shape, or form other parts of the world. So how does the U.S., how does G7 combat that? They're doing it via, climate change, but, whatever it takes, I guess. It's important that we recognize the threat that China really is, that we recognize what China's really trying to do, and that we do something about it. I mean, we can say, okay, well, we're going to make everybody abide by these certain rules. Well, why should they, right? China's there offering handouts, which eventually these countries will pay for, and they should know that, and they should be better educated in terms of that. But we simultaneously need to be offering something as well. And right now, we can't even offer our own people this. I mean, we're making all these rules and regulations surrounding important, vital industries that employ so many people. I mean, think about the Keystone Pipeline. That's a lot of jobs you're talking about getting rid of. And by the way, that pipeline is just going to go somewhere else. It's going to go from Russia to China. Okay? So this is the way of the world. How do you combat that? How do you combat the threat that China is? Maybe you do need all the G7 leaders on board, but I feel like they're drinking so much darn Kool-Aid that nobody can see the forest for the trees, right? So you've got to get some sensibility. You need some, I'm going to use a political science term here, realism. You need some realism in the group. You've got to make it prosperous for each of these countries, including the US of A. You've got to make it prosperous for all of these other countries around the world to want to sign on to all this stuff. Otherwise, what are we doing? Really and truly, what are we doing to ourselves? That's the question you have to ask. And circling back to what did we do to ourselves by way of giving 600 grand to Wuhan, to Wuhan's Institute of Virology, or 3 some million via eco health. I mean, these are questions that need to be answered. And by the way, Mike, forgive me, not Mike Pence, but Mike Pompeo was asking these questions, right? That was what his investigation at the State Department was all about. He said he had seen intelligence, as did President Trump at the time. They both said that we saw intelligence indicating that this probably came from that lab, and so they wanted to investigate it. And yet it was shut down by the Biden administration. Why? Why did the State Department not want that? Apparently because they didn't want it coming out that, we were giving millions of dollars to the Institute of Virology in Wuhan for gain of function research, which essentially is really, really risky research. Oh, right. Okay. I mean, number one, you never should have been giving it to Wuhan to begin with. I mean, do you really want China taking on such a risky proposition? Second of all, you shouldn't be doing gain of function research, okay, knowing that it could cause a worldwide pandemic, which it did. But third, you got to start asking some tough questions right now. You got to ask the question, how did this escape? And I know we're not supposed to talk about this, but I go there, so this is the elephant in the room. Was it deliberate? I'm not saying it was. In fact, my sources have repeatedly told me, going all the way back to February 2020, that they believe that this was an honest mistake. That my sources, by the way, were saying that they didn't think it came from a wet lab. They thought it came from this lab. So was it a biochemical weapon lab? I mean, these are things they don't want us to talk about, and we're probably going to get shut down in some way, shape, or form, whether it be LinkedIn or something else, for even asking these questions. But Americans deserve to know the answers to all of it. And as we take on China economically and politically, which very much could mean at some point militarily in some way, shape, or form. I'm not saying a full-on World War III. I don't want that. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. But, those who have the economic power really are controlling the world. So we want that ball to be in our court, for our people, for our future. And thus we got to confront the things that we don't always want to confront. And that's just the way it is. So social media ought to recognize that. Journalists need to be able to ask these questions. I don't have all the answers, but I ought to be able to ask them, and I ought to be able to continue asking them, and you ought to be able to continue hearing information as it comes forward. I mean, it's not always pretty, and it's not always perfect, but the information and the questions deserve to be heard. I want to remind you all to go to trishintel.com, trishintel.com, my website. I'm so excited to now be part of the Salem family. This podcast, now part of the Salem Podcast Network. Make sure you go to trishintel.com, sign up for my emails, check out all the stories we've got there for you, because again, the truth must be told. I'll see you back here tomorrow.